Barron Trump stands up as Professor mocks Melania. His response shocks everyone. There are moments in life that seem small, insignificant even, but they hold the power to change everything. A typical college classroom, a sharp-tongued professor known for her bold critiques, and a quiet young man, one who had spent years in the shadows, never drawing attention to himself. But that day when his mother was mocked right in front of him, Barron Trump did something. No one, Ed. He stood up. The room fell silent, and then a single sentence, piercing, filled with conviction, shook the entire lecture hall. It left a renowned professor speechless, sent shockwaves through the classroom, and ignited a national conversation. When the video went viral across America, what really happened in that lecture? What made someone who had always chosen silence finally speak up? And how did a professor so confident in her own beliefs find her perspective shattered in a single moment? This is a story that will challenge the way we see others, the way we judge, and the way we listen. Let's uncover the truth behind that unforgettable day. The bell rang in Lecture Hall 204 at Westwood University, one of the most prestigious schools in Massachusetts. Students filed in, chatting animatedly, laughter mixing with the rustling of notebooks and textbooks. No one knew that this class would soon become the talk of the nation. In the third row, a young man sat quietly, just as he did every day. Barron Trump, son of a former U.S. president, but today he was simply Daniel Barron, a student who had chosen to hide his real identity in order to experience life on his own terms. He didn't want special treatment. He didn't want judgment, positive or negative, because of his last name. He wanted to be seen for his mind, not his lineage. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, Barron exuded a calm, almost unshakable presence. He was not the loudest in the room. He did not seek attention, but there was something about him, a quiet strength, a depth that set him apart. He was always watching, listening, thinking, and when the moment came, he would not remain silent. What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay with us as we dive into a confrontation that would change everything. At the front of the lecture hall, Professor Martha Lewis entered with an air of confidence. Her sharp gaze swept across the room, her neatly styled short hair framing a face that exuded intelligence and authority. At 50 years old, she was a seasoned media critic, a frequent guest on major debate panels, and a name that carried weight in academic circles. To her, a classroom was not just a place for teaching, it was a battleground for ideas. She scanned the room, then flashed a knowing, almost provocative smile. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss what truly makes a public image powerful. The class sat up, intrigued. Professor Lewis's lectures were always sharp, sometimes controversial, but that's exactly why students love them. In the front row, Jessica Carter, a top student in the media studies program, sat upright, eyes gleaming with interest. Jessica was brilliant, sharp-minded, but she had a deep skepticism toward politics. To her, world leaders were nothing more than carefully crafted personas polished by PR teams to fit whatever narrative the public wanted to believe. She was convinced that the truth was always far messier than what appeared on TV. She nudged her best friend Mark, who was busy adjusting his phone camera. Here we go again, she whispered. Who do you think Professor Lewis is going to tear apart today? Mark chuckled, lowering his voice. As long as she doesn't go after someone in this room, we should be fine. Neither of them knew that today's discussion would turn into something far bigger than just another debate. Professor Lewis turned to the board and with a flourish wrote two words in bold letters: perception versus reality. The room fell into an anticipatory silence. Something told Barron this was not going to be an ordinary lecture, and he was right. Professor Lewis turned back to the class, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room. We often believe the images that the media presents to us, she said, her voice calm yet commanding. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, is it the truth? The room fell into a focused silence. Let's consider an example. She continued, a public figure, always impeccably dressed, reserved, mysterious, but admired for their elegance. We don't know much about them, yet society celebrates them. But is that real value, or is it just a carefully crafted illusion? She paused for effect, then turned to the board and wrote a name that instantly made Barron's chest tighten: Melania Trump. A shift rippled through the lecture hall. Some students exchanged amused glances. A few chuckled under their breath. Barron clenched his hands lightly. He knew this wasn't going to be just another lecture. Jessica leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. This should be interesting. In the back, Mark casually adjusted his phone, unintentionally hitting the record button, completely unaware that he was about to capture a moment that would change Barron Trump's life forever, and Barron, he sat still, barely breathing. He had promised himself he would stay unnoticed, that his identity would remain hidden, but as the professor's next words echoed through the hall, he knew he wouldn't stay silent for much longer. Let's take Melania Trump as an example. Professor Martha Lewis crossed her arms, standing tall in the center of the lecture hall. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, and then she smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives right before delivering a cutting argument. Let's talk about Melania Trump. She began, her tone laced with subtle mockery, a woman praised by the media for her elegance or flawless appearance. But tell me, has she actually contributed anything meaningful to society? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A few students let out soft chuckles. Others exchanged glances, waiting to see where this was going. Barron tightened his fists under the desk, his heartbeat pounded in his chest, but he stayed silent. He knew better than to react too quickly. In the front row, Jessica raised an intrigued eyebrow. "This is going to be a good one," she murmured. Professor Lewis walked over to the board and wrote 2 words in large letters. Then, turning back to the class, she posed a pointed question. "We live in a world where image often outweighs substance, Melania Trump celebrated for her grace and composure. But is she truly a role model worth honoring?" The classroom buzzed with murmurs. "Let's look at the reality," Professor Lewis continued, her voice razor sharp. "We had a first lady whose speeches were often overshadowed by comments about her accent rather than the substance of her words, a woman who launched the Be Best initiative to combat online bullying, yet married to a man infamous for his controversial remarks on social media." Laughter erupted from a corner of the room in the back. Mark, always on the lookout for viral moments, subtly raised his phone and began recording something, told him this discussion was about to take an interesting turn. Jessica nodded in agreement, resting her chin on her hand, eyes gleaming. "She's got a point. We tend to admire those with a polished image, forgetting how much of it is just media manipulation." A student in the back. People rose to their feet, some clapping, others wiping away silent tears. A few simply stood, their hands pressed together in front of them as if they were still absorbing what they had just heard. But amidst the ovation, one man remained seated. President Trump hadn't moved, his hands still clasped together, tightened slightly. His gaze lingered on Lucas, not just watching him, but seeing him. Then slowly he stood, but what he did next would leave the entire room speechless. The applause thundered through the ballroom, but President Trump didn't acknowledge it right away. He remained still, his hands unfolding slowly as he exhaled, his gaze never leaving Lucas Barrett. Then he stood up, not with the quick rehearsed movements of a politician acknowledging a moment, but with deliberate measured steps, the kind of movement that carried weight, the kind that signaled something real. The room watched, holding its collective breath as Trump took a step toward the stage. His face wasn't the one people were used to seeing at rallies or press conferences. There was no broad grin, no nods of acknowledgement to the cameras. His expression was serious, somber. Even Lucas Barrett, still standing at the microphone, met his gaze for a moment. Neither man spoke. The cameras in the room clicked, flashes capturing the moment as the President of the United States walked up the steps and approached the soldier. Then he did something no one expected. Trump extended his hand. Lucas hesitated just for a second before grasping at the handshake. Was firm, lingering. It wasn't just a photo op moment. It was something unspoken, something understood only by men who knew what sacrifice looked like. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Trump placed his other hand on Lucas's shoulder. A hushed stillness fell over the room. The cameras kept rolling, but no one moved, no one spoke. Finally, Trump leaned in slightly, speaking just loud enough for the microphone to catch his words. "They'll never be forgotten." Lucas swallowed hard, his grip tightening for a brief second before he nodded, not out of formality, but out of understanding. Trump let go, then turned back toward the audience. His expression had shifted again, not softened exactly, but more reflective, more grounded. Then he clapped, and within seconds the entire room erupted again, louder than before. But this wasn't just for Lucas anymore. It wasn't just for the song. It was for every soldier who never got to stand on that stage. And what happened next would ensure that this moment wouldn't just be remembered, it would be talked about across the entire country. The event should have moved on. The next speaker should have taken the stage, and the gala should have continued as planned. But this wasn't just another moment. As Lucas stepped down from the stage, he felt a firm hand on his arm. "Trump wasn't done talking. Walk with me," the president said, voice low but steady. Lucas hesitated for only a second before nodding. The two men moved toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the Cameras away from the prepared speeches and scripted pleasantries, a small group of aides and Secret Service agents hovered nearby, but this was a conversation that needed no audience. Trump turned to him, eyes sharper, now focused. That song, he said, pausing, that wasn't just music, that was. He stopped, shaking his head slightly, as if searching for the right words. Lucas nodded, his voice calm. It was the truth. Trump let out a breath, studying him. I've met a lot of veterans, heard a lot of stories, but I've never heard it put like that. He paused. You served in Afghanistan. Lucas shifted, slightly feeling the weight of memories press against his chest. Yes, sir, 2 tours. First time I left, I was 22. Second time, he trailed off. Trump gave a small nod. And that's when you got hit. Lucas didn't flinch. Yes, sir, a beat of silence. Passed. Do you still talk to any of the men from your unit? Trump asked. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. The ones who made it home. Yes, then softer. Too many didn't. The weight of the words hung between them. Trump exhaled. You know, I get criticized a lot. People say I don't understand the military, that I don't feel what they feel. Maybe they're right. He glanced at Lucas, but I listen, and tonight I heard you. Lucas studied him for a long moment. He wasn't sure what to say to that. Trump continued. This song, this story, people need to hear it, not just in this room, not just tonight. He straightened, glancing toward one of his aides. Get this out there. Make sure every veteran in this country hears this. Lucas blinked. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was something bigger. Within hours, clips of the performance flooded the internet. The video spread across social media. News stations and morning talk shows. Some headlines called it a powerful tribute. Others called it a rare emotional moment for a president often seen as unshakable. But the real impact wasn't in the headlines. It was in the emails and messages Lucas received from soldiers he had never met, from Gold Star families who had lost their sons and daughters, from veterans who felt invisible until now. It was in the phone calls for men he had served, with voices thick with emotion, saying I needed to hear that. It was in the way one song managed to do what years of speeches couldn't. Remind the world of the faces behind the sacrifice. But there was still one more thing Lucas needed to do. The days following the gala were a blur. Lucas Barrett had never been one for attention, yet his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Veterans, families of fallen soldiers, strangers who had never set foot in a war zone but felt the weight of his words. The video of his performance had spread beyond anything he had imagined. Talk shows debated it, news anchors analyzed it, but none of that mattered to Lucas. What mattered were the voices on the other end of the calls. A man from Oklahoma who had lost his younger brother in Afghanistan, a woman from Texas who had served but never felt seen, a father from Ohio who had folded a flag over the coffin of his only son. Every message carried the same theme: thank you for saying what we couldn't. And yet, amidst the flood of messages, one stood out. It wasn't from a journalist or a politician. It was from a woman named Marjorie Tillman, the mother of Private Jason Tillman, a young soldier from Lucas's unit who hadn't made it home. Lucas read her words over and over. I never got to hear my son's voice again, but last night I heard it in your song. His hands trembled slightly as he typed back, he's never been forgotten. And that was when Lucas knew this wasn't the end of something. This was the beginning. He took a deep breath, looking out at the California sunset from his small apartment. The war had taken a lot from him, but it had also left him with something he never realized. He carried the responsibility to keep telling their stories. The next morning, he called the number that had been left in his inbox. Not a media request, not a politician, but a small nonprofit that helped veterans tell their stories through music. And just like that, one song turned into a movement. Because the truth is, no soldier is ever truly gone as long as their story is told. There are moments in life that remind us what really matters, moments that cut through the noise, the politics, the divisions, and remind us of the people behind the headlines. Lucas Barrett's story wasn't just about a song. It was about honor, sacrifice, the cost of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, it was about reminding the world that some voices, no matter how quiet, deserve to be heard. If this story moved you, share it. Because sometimes the greatest tribute we can give is simply remembering. If you believe in honoring those who have served, consider supporting veteran organizations that help our heroes transition back to civilian life. Every story matters. Every voice counts. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters.